what do you make of it? I mean, this year, the Hajj, people say it's a special layer of significance, especially with the division in the Gulf region. Is this going to be another trouble, or actually is helping many defenses?
Well, the Hajj is always a very special event. As your introduction just made clear, it's expected that some 2 million Muslims from all over the world will be descending on Mecca. Some 1.7 million people have already entered Saudi Arabia specifically to perform the Hajj. It's always a great event. The Saudi authorities take the custodianship of the two holy mosques very seriously. It's a blessing, obviously, in many ways, but it's a great responsibility. Over the decades, they have spent billions of dollars in expanding the actual mosque in Mecca, as well as its environs, taking many measures to make sure that it is as safe and as secure as possible. Last year was a good example.
Mr. Nazer, it is no secret that you're providing some services to the Saudi Arabia embassy in Washington, D.C. Very understanding that you're saying all positive words. But at the same time, you are seeing there were some discussions, if not dispute, in the Gulf region among countries, Saudi Arabia on the one hand, Qatar on the other hand. What about this year? Is this Hajj going to be a mending process or a further dividing process? Your view. Right.
So I do want to make it very clear I do not speak on behalf of the Saudi embassy in any way, or the Saudi government. But I do want to make it clear, if one looks at Saudi Arabia's history, Saudi Arabia has never politicized Hajj. It has never banned nationals of any country anywhere in the world, even when there were serious diplomatic or even military disputes. So, for instance, during the first Gulf War in 1990, as Saudi Arabia was at a war with Iraq, it never banned Iraqi pilgrims from going to Hajj. It hasn't banned Iranian pilgrims,
so
even though relations were strained.
And it's certainly. Is that what you're saying, Mr. Nazer?
No, I'm not saying that it will. I don't think that anyone wants any trouble, and this is not a place for politics. It is a place for a religious renewal, and Saudi Arabia takes pride in right.
For religious
so it is not
purposes.
really a place for politics. Saudi Arabia
converging on the Mecca for the Hajj. Thousands have died in the past tragedies. It has a lot to do with whether the management is a plus or a minus. 2 years ago, at least 717 pilgrims were killed in stampedes near Mecca, deadlier than the one in the year 2006, when 364 people died in a crash at the foot of a bridge. Hundreds died in similar situation, 1997, 1994, and well, in 1990, nearly 1,400 pilgrims, almost all of them Asians, died in an overcrowded tunnel. This is only one of the dangers that we are talking about, Professor Ding, here, that is overcrowdedness and the lack of sufficient management due to the management skills and possibly due to the fact that it's too crowded after all. So, Professor Ding, do you think this year there will be efficient systems to prevent that from happening?
Well, I don't think we can say there will be no accidents like before 2 years ago. I really think that Mecca is a very small town, and the Hajj is the biggest gathering of people in the world. So 3 million people will be gathering in this small town. So Saudi Arabia has done many measures to improve the safety and security for the programs, such as expanding the Holy Mosque and facilitating the entry of the programs from all over the world. And they have simplified many religious rituals for the pilgrimage. So Saudi Arabia has did a lot
But the question is,
regard.
what if there were things happen? Who's going to take responsibility? That question has been repeatedly asked over the past decades when there were stampedes happened, and people are asking the reasons why. Mr. Nazer, you can't just say, well, it's too crowded and therefore we can't control. Things happened and it happened. You can't say that because it's human life that we're talking about here. So, Mr. Nazer, what are we talking about here? A better system? What kind of better system?
Right. I don't remember saying that things will happen. And certainly any time that there are accidents, they're always tragic. That's always a tragic event. Saudi authorities have looked into previous accidents to see exactly what happened, what went wrong, and have taken measures to prevent them. So as the professor said, over the past 3 decades, not only has it expanded the actual mosque, but it has actually expanded and improved the conditions around the other areas around the mosque. So it has built tunnels and bridges. It has thousands of security personnel. It has hundreds of dozens of helicopters actually surveying the Mecca itself to make sure that to help prevent any possible accidents. And
right.
You know, it's very. Right, so it's, you know, I'm old enough to remember what the Grand Mosque was like 30 years ago. Yeah. It has really, it's very difficult. It's hard for me to understand people who try to dismiss the many efforts that Saudi government has done. Expended billions of dollars to make sure that it is as safe and as secure as possible.
But the question is, who is going to take the responsibilities if things happen? That has been a question being asked for decades. Nobody is shouldering the responsibilities. Balls are being kicked all the time as to what exactly happened, who should be responsible. I'm asking a very legitimate question to both of you as the panelists for this discussion. Let's move on to another question, which is also important. That is, what is happening in the Middle East, especially the Gulf region countries? And will this Hajj eventually be able to help countries to open their border and be able to melt the ice that's already been the focus of the world attention? Professor Ding, you have a view?
Well, I think Saudi authorities have offered the entry of the Hajj from the Qatar. But I think this doesn't represent a concrete step towards the lift of the embargo and the sanctions against Qatar. And it will take much longer time to resolve the rift between Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE and Qatar. As we know that this crisis is really between Emiratis and Qataris. So Saudi Arabia can contribute somehow to the relief of the crisis, but at the end of the day, it should be direct talks between Emiratis and Qataris.
Mr. Nazer, do you agree with that? Saudi Arabia's role is limited.
Well, I think the Qatari crisis, it's important to realize that Qatar has, this crisis with Qatar involves more than Saudi Arabia and frankly more than the Emirates. There are a number of countries that have expressed serious concerns about Qatar's foreign policy for decades, 4 of which are Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, severed diplomatic relations. There are other countries that have also downgraded that diplomatic representation. I'm thinking here about Yemen and some other countries as well. So I think Qatar has, the ball is basically in Qatar's court. I think that it must address these serious concerns. These are not new concerns. They are concerns that have been raised over and over again by some of its closest neighbors. And they really involve some fundamental issues, including non-interference in the domestic affairs of some of its neighbors, not supporting militant organizations in the region and around the world, not supporting. So it's a complicated issue. And again, but I think it's important to note that as far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, at least, the Hajj is not a factor here. Politics has no place at Hajj. It has allowed, and it has always allowed pilgrims from Qatar from the beginning. It did open its borders recently to facilitate
that we also have
the entry of more Hajjis.
Yeah, I have to cut you short because you're repeating some of the messages earlier that from the other panelists. And it's important that we have a different voice coming in. We have Mr. Mohammad Marandi, who is coming in from Beirut. He is a professor and dean of the World Faculty Studies of the University of Tehran. Of course, Professor Marandi might have a very different voice compared to Mr. Nazer, who is a special consultant to the Saudi Arabia embassy in Washington. Mr. Marandi, we're talking about whether the Hajj will be able to serve as a possibility for all countries to melt their eyes, given what is going on earlier in the Gulf countries, the split among them. On the one hand, Qatar, on the other hand, Saudi Arabia, United Emirates, and some of the others. Your take here?
Well, I think there are a number of problems, really. The Hajj is to bring all people together, and it's supposed to bring all people from all walks of life, from all classes, from all races, as one people. But the problem really is that Saudi Arabia has problems not just with one neighbor or two neighbors, but it has problems with all sorts of people. This year we saw the problem that has been created with the pilgrims from Qatar. Also, we saw that many Iranians died during the Hajj pilgrimage, and the Saudi government never even expressed condolences. But I think the most important problem is that even during the Hajj pilgrimage, we see Saudi Wahhabi clerics giving speeches to people saying that people who don't have the same ideology as Mohammad bin Abdul Wahhab are non-Muslim. And they give these speeches in the holy mosque of the Prophet. They give the speeches in the holy mosque in the Mecca, in the house of God, in the house of worship of all Muslims. They give these speeches and they basically say that those who don't believe the ideas of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, they are not only non-Muslim, but they can be killed, their goods and their belongings are forfeited, their wives can be taken as booty. They say these in open speeches, and there are many recordings of these, including this year, where Iranians who are in pilgrimage record these and send them back home. So the problem is that Saudi Arabia is preaching the same ideology as ISIS and Al-Qaeda even today, and not just to its own population, but to the millions of people who travel to Hajj every year and who want to become closer to God, and where they should be more united and people brought together. Instead, what they're doing is they're dividing people and creating the atmosphere for more young people to be misled towards extremism.
All right. We got some views very different from earlier expressed by the other two gentlemen. May I go to you, Mr. Nazer, as a result? Two things. One is, should Saudi Arabia also apologizing to those who have died in the stampede who are Iranians? Secondly, whether some of the extreme sect of the religions have been practiced in the Hajj, and is it fair to the majority of those worshippers going to the Hajj? Mr. Nazer.
Right, so if we want to mention videos, actually the videos that I've seen of pilgrims arriving in Saudi Arabia paint a very different picture, so I've seen several videos of including Iranian pilgrims at airports in Saudi Arabia thanking Saudi authorities for their warm welcome that they received, for the accommodations they provided. There are an estimated 86,000 pilgrims from Iran going to Mecca this year. There's, like I said, 2 million people, Muslims coming from all over the world. You have videos from all over the world of people thanking Saudi Arabian authorities.
Okay.
In terms of ISIS, I mean, ISIS has targeted Saudi Arabia repeatedly. It has declared war against the Saudi government and the Saudi people. And the Saudi government, in turn, has made sure, now sees ISIS as its #1 enemy. It has gone after ISIS through security operations, and it has actually, contrary to the other guest claims, what Saudi Arabia, its highest religious authorities and political authorities preach is that Islam is a religion of toleration, and moderation, and peaceful coexistence. ISIS is absolutely has made it a point to target Saudi Arabia. It has targeted its security authority.
Yeah, we don't want to repeat the same lines again. But one question is about the Wahhabism, also mentioned by Professor Marandi. What did you say, Mr. Nazer, as a response? Brief, please, and also your central point, if you can.
Right, so I hear, like I said, I hear these references to Wahhabism, but again, the truth of the matter is something very, very different. So if you listen to Saudi Arabia's most senior clerics, that is not the message they send out. In fact, and in terms of schools and mosques, anyone who actually preaches extremist ideology of any sort is held to account. There have been hundreds of imams have been dismissed from their jobs or have been retrained. The same goes for teachers at schools. That is not the message that Saudi Arabians listen to. And in terms of just
what
in terms
about
of
you?
relations,
you're not coming from Saudi Arabia, right? You're coming from the United States in Washington. You're only serving as a political consultant to Saudi Arabia. So what about your personal view, Mr. Nazer? Do you have, or
that is well some
official views from
Saudi
Arabia?
So some of this I do speak from I do speak from personal experience. I have been to Mecca many times. I have seen the expansion of the Grand Mosque. I have seen the accommodations that the Saudi government has put in place. It is a place, frankly, where you see Muslims from all over the world praying peacefully. I see nothing, but it's always a beautiful experience.
Professor
I don't,
Dean,
you know, the professors.
May I go to you now? We also see enormous amount of Chinese crowds going to the Hajj. On the one hand, how to guarantee the security of the Chinese citizens there. Secondly, how to make sure that there is a peaceful worshiping of Islamism, while at the same time there would be some healthy growth of the religion inside China. Professor Ding, final words from you.
I think Chinese government has taken many steps regarding ensuring the safety and security of the Chinese pilgrims. For example, Chinese Islamic Association, every year they do some orientations for all the Chinese pilgrims and show them how to perform their religious duties in Mecca.
I see.
And I think the safety of Chinese Muslims, Chinese pilgrims, and pilgrims from all over the world depends mostly on Saudi authorities.
I see.
So what we need to do is follow the instructions and orientations of the Saudi government.